Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. My name is Ann Kozel. I'm a registered dietitian and Extension State Nutrition Specialist in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition at Colorado State University. Today, we're going to talk about protein. So outside of my role as Extension, I'm also a nutrition counselor. So I get a lot of questions on protein, and I've counseled many a client on the subject. So I'm excited to share the research on the topic, along with some of my clinical insights on how I use this information to work with clients. There's a lot of information out there about protein, so I'm hoping that today's webinar will help you navigate the topic with more confidence. So today's presentation is titled Understand Your Protein Needs, a look at high protein diets and what our bodies really need. So even though this webinar is pre-recorded, you can still ask questions. During the webinar, feel free to type your questions in the chat and we'll collect them. You will also have access to a post survey where you can submit your questions. And at the very end of my presentation, you'll see a QR code where you can access the post survey. So we'll address all of the questions in a follow-up email that comes after the webinar. In that email, you will also receive a link to the recording of the webinar in both English and Spanish. So thanks again for joining me. This slide simply states that Colorado State University is an equal opportunity institution. Okay, so here's what we'll be covering today. First of all, what is protein and why do we need it? Current recommendations for protein intake, high protein diets and potential benefits, concerns and considerations, and choosing the right protein source for you. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. What is protein and why do we need it? So protein is found in every living cell of the body. Next to water, it's the most plentiful substance that we have in our bodies. So protein functions as a building block for bones, muscles, cartilage, skin, hair, and blood. Proteins are also building blocks for enzymes, hormones, and vitamins, all of which play vital roles in our body. So while our body can make some of the proteins that it needs to function, protein foods are essential in filling in those gaps. Okay, so we need to eat protein every day because our bodies don't store protein in the same way they store carbohydrates and fat. So if our intake of protein is too low for too long, our bodies resort to using our muscle mass as a protein source, and we don't want that to happen. So when we eat protein foods, our bodies digest the food, they turn them into amino acids, and then amino acids are the building blocks that our bodies use to form new cells, regenerate organs, and create muscle mass, and a lot of other things as well. Amino acids also help to build our immune system. They play a role in gut function, and they act as precursors to neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. So as you can tell, these amino acids are vitally important. So where does protein come from? Like I said, our bodies can produce some of the amino acids that we need to function, but the rest has to come from food. So food sources of protein include fish and poultry, meat, beans, legumes, grains, soy products, dairy products, nuts, seeds, and eggs, all depicted here. Okay, so I mentioned that we need to eat protein every day. And here's the question, how much do we actually need, right? So throughout this presentation, I will refer to the amount of protein in grams because this is how it's represented in the research. And talking about grams is also an easy way to make comparisons. But just know these numbers are just for reference and not something that you need to calculate or count. It's just an easy way to talk about it. When you look at the dietary guidelines for Americans, they focus more on including protein as a part of a healthy dietary pattern and less on how many grams you should be eating in a day. But that said, most of their recommendations are based on the information that we're going to discuss here. Okay, so let's get started on this. There's a safe range of protein intake that's set by the Institute of Medicine. So the minimum amount of protein that we need to meet our basic nutritional needs, stay healthy, is called the RDA. That's represented here, or recommended dietary allowance. The RDA for protein was determined back in 1941 during the war in order to define the minimum amount of protein intake required for our troops overseas. So the RDA is calculated as 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. What that more simply means is about 56 grams of protein per day for an individual weighing about 150 pounds. So we're going to try to simplify this. There's a lot of calculations here. What that 56 grams of protein looks like is about a cup of Greek yogurt, about a 4-ounce salmon fillet, and a cup of black beans. Okay. Then in the second box down below, we have the tolerable upper limit. And that represents the very highest amount of protein that's recommended by the Institute of Medicine. So according to them, we should not exceed 3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, or more simply, about 225 grams of protein per day for an individual weighing 150 pounds. So that's represented here. Look at how much food, or look at how much protein you have to eat in a day to eat 225 grams of protein. That's a lot, not counting fruits and vegetables and grains and all the other things that you'd be eating. Okay, so that's a lot. That's the tolerable upper limit. So most Americans, we're somewhere in the middle. We're eating about 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Let's simplify that. That's about 90 grams of protein per day, based on an individual that weighs about 150 pounds. Okay. And then one last thing on this point. The weight of a food does not necessarily equate to the weight of grams of, I'm sorry. The weight of a food does not necessarily equate to the number of grams of protein that it contains. For example, a 3.5-ounce chicken breast, which is about the size of my palm, weighs approximately 100 grams, but it only has about 25 grams of protein in it. And that's because a chicken breast also contains fat, water, and other nutrients, not just protein. So when referring to grams of protein, I'm not necessarily referring to the weight of the food. Okay, so you probably have noticed, and this is why I'm here and probably why you're here, that high protein diets are everywhere. They're all over social media. Reputable news sources are writing about them, and I am asked about this subject regularly in counseling sessions. So what constitutes a high protein diet? A high protein diet is any dietary pattern that exceeds the RDA. Remember, that's about 56 grams of protein for a 150-pound individual. And as you've probably seen, high protein diets are touted for lots of things, including weight loss, weight management, muscle growth, muscle repair, increased meal satisfaction, and more. There are a lot more things, but I can't go over them all today. So we're going to focus on these. Okay, so let's start looking at the research and find out what it says. We'll start with weight loss. Okay. So overall, there is a solid body of evidence showing that higher protein diets are helpful for those struggling to achieve and maintain a healthy body weight. Studies show that when calorie intake is reduced to promote weight loss, higher protein diets, when compared to normal or lower protein diets, may result in more fat loss and less muscle loss. So it's important to note that whenever we lose weight, we're losing both fat and muscle. Okay, in some cases, up to 25% of the weight that we lose is muscle. Okay, so why do we care? Loss of muscle may impede further weight loss or weight maintenance because losing muscle mass can negatively affect metabolism. So using a higher protein diet to maintain muscle mass can be very helpful, especially when we're losing weight. So studies also show that high protein diets aid in weight loss by positively influencing appetite and satiety, which we'll talk more about in a minute. And also higher protein diets favor thermogenesis. And all that really means is that digesting protein uses more calories than digesting carbohydrates or fats. So burning protein just takes a little bit more energy. Multiple sources noted that individuals with prediabetes, diabetes, and those with overweight and obesity were found to benefit more from a high protein diet compared to those without. Okay, so how does protein intake affect hunger and satiety? This is one of my favorite things to talk about in counseling sessions, and there are a lot of great studies looking at this. So overall, higher dietary protein intake, about 1.5 times the RDA, helps to reduce appetite by enhancing fullness and satiety, which is just another word for satisfaction. This means that you're typically more satisfied by a meal that contains ample protein. A number of studies comparing a high protein breakfast, about 30 grams of protein, to a low or normal protein breakfast found the following. And I have it listed here, but I'll give you a little bit more detail. Okay, those studies found a higher protein breakfast provides improved satiety, so greater satisfaction with that meal, increased afternoon fullness. So what it's saying is that eating a high protein breakfast is still affecting you and your hunger levels come the afternoon. Okay. Improvement in overall diet quality for the entire rest of the day. So you tend to make healthier choices for the remainder of the day when you have a nice high protein breakfast. Reduced evening snacking, reduced food motivation and reward. So you're just like less tempted by unhealthy treats that are sitting around. And a high protein breakfast results in reduced hunger stimulating hormone called ghrelin and an increased satiety hormone called PYY. So as a nutrition counselor, I can definitely vouch for this effect. When a client comes in saying they're hungry all the time, craving sweets, relying heavily on snacks throughout the day, I always look at their protein intake at breakfast. Oftentimes, if we can increase the amount of protein that they're eating for breakfast or that first meal of the day, they feel much better throughout the rest of the day and they feel more in control of their food choices. A few small studies also looked at high protein snacks and found that high protein snacks are better than high fat snacks at improving appetite control, satiety, and reducing subsequent food intake. So they were just comparing high protein snacks to high fat snacks to see which one held you longer and kept you more satisfied. And then one study, which I just kind of thought was interesting, found that a snack of Greek yogurt that had 24 grams of protein did lead to greater afternoon satiety and a longer delay in eating your next meal. And the same amount of Greek yogurt with only 9 grams of protein did not have those effects. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we typically consume protein in a day. As I mentioned, most Americans are already eating a higher protein diet compared to the RDA. We're eating closer to 90 grams of protein as opposed to that 56, which is the minimum amount that we need to stay healthy. So the image on the left here represents how we typically consume protein throughout the day. We usually have very little protein at breakfast, a little bit more at lunch, but most of our protein intake is consumed at dinner time. As a result, we end up hungry and dissatisfied during the day, which can drive mindless snacking and food cravings and trips to the candy bowl during our afternoon slump, right? I'm guilty of that. But many of us are not eating enough protein at breakfast or even at lunch for the protein to work its magic on our fullness and satiety. So the image on the right here shows us eating about the same amount of protein, about that 90 grams, but distributed more evenly throughout the day. So front loading our protein, getting more at breakfast and lunch, does just what the research says. It keeps us more satisfied throughout the day. It reduces unhealthy snacking as the day goes on, and it even reduces food motivation, meaning that we may be less tempted by that like plate of donuts that's sitting in the office break room, right? We might be able to walk by with a little bit more confidence. Okay. And here I just wanted to show you, this is a reference that Extension created outlining the amount of protein in common breakfast foods. So this reference can help you add a little bit more protein to your morning routine. And we'll go ahead and include this document in our follow-up email. Okay, so we know that higher protein intake may help with weight loss. It definitely helps us to stay feeling full and satisfied. But how about building muscle? Do we really need to chug protein drinks in order to get buff? So the research shows that athletes and just plain old healthy individuals who are routinely exercising have an increased need for muscle growth and repair, as you can imagine. If you're an athlete or you're working out, you're needing to grow your muscles and repair them, right? And we know that dietary protein intake does stimulate muscle protein synthesis and muscle repair. So what the research shows that is eating a higher protein diet can help us build muscle and help repair that muscle when we need to. It also shows that in endurance athletes, increased protein intake may reduce exercise-related stress and fatigue, and reduce diet dissatisfaction when trying to reduce weight. So if an athlete is trying to reduce weight for an event that they're participating in, a higher protein diet can help them do that with more satisfaction. But I do want to point out that the research shows that consuming an excessive amount of protein above that tolerable upper limit we showed on that initial slide does not improve performance or body composition. So eating an excessive amount of protein over and above what we need does not improve anything for us. Okay. And lastly, I get asked about this all the time. What's the timing of protein that I need to consume around my workout? So the studies show that a snack containing protein and carbohydrates may increase muscle protein synthesis after resistance training. So after you lift weights or do some sort of strength training, having a snack with both protein and carbs can help you increase muscle mass. The need for protein also appears to be greater for those strength and power athletes than for endurance trained athletes. So they might need a little bit more if they're doing a lot of strength training. Okay, so what's the moral of the story? You really don't need to rely on protein supplements, even if you exercise regularly. Most of your protein needs can be met by real food. The exception may be with professional athletes or very serious athletes that are trying to meet a very specific protein goal, okay? But I wanted to show you, here are some post-workout snack ideas, but these are also great high protein snacks that you can include any time of day. So we have Greek yogurt or cottage cheese with granola and berries, a fruit smoothie with Greek yogurt or nut butter for added protein, whole grain toast with eggs and avocado, a whole wheat tortilla with beans and cheese, or just simply a plate of cheese and nuts and fruit or vegetables. Any of these would be appropriate for after a workout, or really any time of day. Okay, this is another thing that I really like to hit home with my clients, is that protein intake is especially important as we age, okay? So after the age of 40, we start to lose muscle mass. It's called sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss. So adults can lose up to 4 to 6 pounds of muscle per decade, okay? And if we do that every decade after the age of 40, we're increasing the risk for frailty and falls in our older age, okay? The great thing is that research shows that consuming protein in combination, consuming adequate protein in combination with strength training, if possible, helps to maintain muscle mass as we age. And maintaining muscle mass helps us to stay strong and mobile and prevent falls and fractures. Protein intake also helps us recover from illness, injury, and surgeries. So what happens as we age is that the efficiency of converting dietary protein, meaning the protein that we eat, converting that into muscle mass is less efficient as we age, okay? However, studies found that when healthy elderly individuals consume a decent amount of protein, well, let me rephrase this. Healthy elderly individuals who consumed the highest amount of protein in this study lost the least amount of muscle mass, okay? But again, consuming protein in excess of that tolerable upper limit is not shown to be beneficial. Okay. But there was a correlation with these individuals that consumed more protein. Overall, they lost less muscle mass as they aged. Okay, so after looking at all the studies, who should consider a high protein diet? Okay, I've listed this out for you here, basically just reviewing everything that we just talked about. So the people that you consider a higher protein diet would be those looking to lose weight or maintain weight, especially those individuals with prediabetes, diabetes, overweight, or obesity. Of course, athletes, active individuals that regularly exercise, middle-aged and older adults, because again, middle age is when you want to start that process since we start losing muscle mass around age 40 moving forward. It's found that most young adults tend to consume the recommended amount of protein, but later in life, about 30% of men in their 50s and 60s start to fall short of their required protein intake, and nearly half of women aged 50 or older also fall short of the amount of protein they need to consume. Moving on, people who are pregnant or breastfeeding may need to eat a little bit more protein. Individuals with specific health conditions, and those recovering from illness or injury. If you think you're in one of these categories, speak with your doctor or a dietitian about your specific needs. I'm not going to outline that here. Okay. So if you're someone that likes numbers, I put a little chart here about how you could calculate your body weight in kilograms, how to convert weight in pounds to weight in kilograms, and then how to multiply that times your recommended protein needs to get the amount in grams of protein that you should think about consuming daily. Okay. Now, it's fun to do the math. I like doing this because I do this for a living. But remember that these equations are just generalizations based on research. And I always recommend speaking with a dietitian who can tell you more about your specific needs. Okay. And please keep in mind, even if you fall into one of these categories, it's important to recognize that you may already be following a high protein diet by definition and may not need more protein in your diet. What I find is the most important is how we're allocating that protein throughout the day. Okay, so after reviewing all the potential benefits of a high protein diet, are there any concerns or red flags? So if you talk to any dietitian, they'll tell you that it's important to eat a variety of foods throughout the day to maximize your nutrition intake. So focusing solely on protein can create an unbalanced approach to eating. And vegetables, fruits, and starches provide vitally important minerals, vitamins, and fiber that cannot be overlooked. Okay. So consider structuring your meals according to my plate. In this way, you're able to get enough protein and balance that with other foods. So my plate recommends filling half of your plate with fruits and vegetables. These are all representative here in these different plates. A quarter with protein and a quarter with grains or starches. They also typically recommend about 1 serving of dairy per day, which also contains protein. So other things to consider, adding more protein does add calories. So if you're adding more protein to your diet without adjusting the rest of your diet or activity levels, weight loss may be difficult, right? Because you're just adding extra food. The studies that we looked at earlier were done with participants that were on a reduced calorie diet, and then they were measuring protein levels and how that affected their weight loss, right? In my personal opinion, is consider an intuitive approach to adding protein. So instead of counting every gram, try adding protein at breakfast and at snack time and see how that's affecting your hunger and your fullness, and then you can make adjustments from there. Another very important thing is, choose a variety of protein sources. Many Americans get the right amount of protein we need from meat and poultry and eggs, but we're falling short on our intake of seafood, nuts, seeds, and soy products, right? So varying your protein sources will provide a range of nutrients, and that's always important. Lean proteins like poultry and fish, and plant-based proteins like legumes and nuts are nutrient dense and limited in saturated fat. So despite all the potential benefits that may come with following a higher protein diet, consuming too many protein foods like higher fat meats and high fat dairy can increase your intake level, increase your saturated fat intake, which can be harmful and may increase risk for cardiovascular disease. Okay, so this is kind of some application, right? How do I know how much protein to eat and how to figure that out? Well, I talked about the recommendations for protein intake in terms of grams. Most of us are not actually calculating the number of grams of protein we eat, and a lot of us don't even know how. So the Dietary Guidelines for Americans provides the MyPlate tool, which we just talked about, that helps us determine how to fill our plates. Okay, and there are a variety of ways to fill the protein section of our plate. Remember, variety is key, right? Research shows that most of us overeat protein foods from the poultry, meat, and eggs category and undereat seafood, nuts, seeds, soy products, beans, peas, and lentils. Okay, so keep this in mind when choosing your next meal. A serving size of protein can be measured in ounces or ounce equivalents. This is referring to the weight of the food itself, not just the grams of protein it contains. Here are some examples laid out for you here of different foods, their typical serving sizes, and about how many grams of protein they contain. So for example, a 3 to 4 ounce serving of fish, about the size of your palm, has about 22 to 30 grams of protein in it. Okay, so that's a really cool reference right there. If you're choosing a packaged food, you can refer to the nutrition label, shown here, to tell you how much protein is contained in a serving of food. So you look at the serving size up here and the amount of protein down here. So this food, for example, if you eat 1 serving of this food, you'll get 3 grams of protein. If you eat 2 servings of the food, you'll get 6, so on and so forth. So that's a great reference. I also wanted to share this chart that I use to help my clients estimate how much of a given food they're eating. For example, 3 ounces of meat, like I've talked about, is about the size of the palm of your hand. 1 ounce of nuts is about the size of a cupped palm, and so on. So this is a very cool reference that you can, we'll obviously provide to you when we give you the recording. You can look at that. The chart on the right shows ounces or ounce equivalents of daily protein needed to meet your minimum requirement. So this is the RDA. Remember that minimum protein intake requirement based on age and gender. These last 3 slides I just showed you will help you estimate about how much protein you're getting and how that measures up with what you need. Okay. So to sum everything up, just one kind of great takeaway slide that I feel like puts everything in a nutshell for you. How do you optimize your protein intake? You can include a protein source, preferably one of those under-eaten protein sources I talked about, with most meals and snacks. You can distribute protein evenly throughout the day, really focusing on that beginning of the day, that breakfast time. And then choose a variety of protein sources. That's going to maximize your nutrient intake. And that wraps everything up. So I hope you're feeling a little bit more confident in navigating your protein intake. And I really appreciate you attending this webinar today, and hopefully we'll see you for the next one. So please go to this link or scan the QR code to access our post survey. In this post survey, you can submit any questions that you have regarding today's webinar. We will address those questions in a follow-up email after the webinar. And like I said before, that email will also include links to the webinar recording in both English and Spanish. Thanks again for joining me.